9/11 was a Tuesday morning.
My wife has a name for it. She calls it September 11th sky because it was so blue that day.
There was a major incident in Lower Manhattan.
A twin engine, not quite an airliner. It could in fact be a commuter plane.
People rushed by my desk saying a plane hit the World Trade Center.
Listen, hold on just a moment. We got an explosion inside.
I come out of the subway and a whole crowd of people are looking south with their heads raised to the sky. A woman standing next to me says, "Do you think it's coming down?" I go, "No, the loads have already redistributed. It's achieved equilibrium," which to me is a lifelong lesson not to draw conclusions instantaneously.
I understood that engineers had a role when something like this occurs.
We all worked together. We just marched all the way down to the site.
When the towers collapsed, the ground shaking was felt and measured at the Lamont Doherty Observatory up along the Palisades as like a 3-point something on the Richter scale, which is how we measure earthquakes, right? The only thing that we could think of that was somewhat similar were how the structural engineers in California had developed a process for evaluating buildings after an earthquake. You know, the city was shut down from 14th Street down. So who decides when is it safe for people to go back to their homes? So in order to assess the 400 buildings immediately surrounding the Trade Center site, we used aerial photographs, we sent people to the roofs of buildings.
We know materials and we know physics, and we know gravity. Like, if something looks like it's going to fall, we're pretty good candidates to make that assessment. So the difference between doing a rapid assessment of a building that's collapsed already and doing a rapid assessment of a building that's standing and just is old and in need of maintenance, they're two very different things.
We do try to send everyone to construction sites as much as we can, just so they can see how things get put together, because as you see things getting put together, it's easier to understand how things can fall apart.
There were so many buildings that were damaged, and some of them, very severely.
The Winter Garden, which is a glass structure that is between the Amex building and World Financial Center 1 and 2. There was actually a piece of the facade that was stuck in the corner of the American Express building that was kind of dangling. They wound up taking some, cabling, aircraft cabling, what have you, and tying it around the piece and anchoring it to one of the interior columns.
We're structural engineers, and the areas that were rebuilt specifically after the 93 bombing included the chiller plant. We had the knowledge, the ability to get to those areas. Same thing with the refrigerant from the tanks, right? If those are heated or they catch fire, they create mustard gas that could kill people that are working and, spending all that time there.
We initially had 8-hour shifts, all right? But that wasn't working because there was so much going on. So we had to change that to two 12-hour shifts.
I was surveying buildings. At some point I was in the subway system looking at stuff, and we were all over the place.
There was tremendous grief. There were people that would stand along the West Highway to thank the people that were going down. And that was very emotional because we were going down there to help And these people that were standing there also wanted to help. But the only way that they could help is to try to thank us and support us.
There were people who would stop their lives, and restaurants sent food and water for everyone involved in the rescue effort. So I will never forget New Yorkers and the nation, the way the nation came to support New York and the other areas attacked at that time. That was pretty powerful.
Someone came up to me and said that they're digging there with a backhoe trying to clear out debris, but the subway tunnel's immediately below that. If they puncture that tunnel, groundwater will rush in and it will fill the entire New York City subway system.
The slurry wall is dug in all the way around the site, and then as the basement floors are built, they put pressure against the slurry wall. They hold back the Hudson River. All right? One morning, it was a Sunday, I get a call from someone from DDC, and they say, "You better get down here." So we run down there, and we see this crack in the ground. So it was a very dangerous situation, and I remember walking down behind the slurry wall with George Tamaro with our hard hats on, and I said to him, "What are we doing here?"
I was always aware that the Hudson was a threat. The Hudson was a threat when we did the original wall. We began to recognize that there was a valley north of the Liberty Street slurry wall where the debris was not the full depth of the excavation, which meant that the slurry walls did not have lateral support. And one morning we detected there was something like 14 inches of movement. We began pumping water outside to diminish the load on the wall, and we began putting soil on the inside to support the wall so it wouldn't collapse. That was the most critical part.
The water elevation was only about 10 or so feet below street level. That if the Hudson River flooded into the site, just due to the elevation differences between the World Trade Center site in New Jersey, was that you would have flooded the World Trade Center site, which in turn would have flooded the path tubes, which in turn would have then flooded all the way up to 14th Street and flooded the entire New York City subway system.
The pieces of the tower were being shipped over to the New Jersey salvage yards, where the pieces were being cut up and thrown on boats to go be recycled.
My first day on the site was September 13th, and I was the last engineer to leave on July 15th, 2002. We had a fence around the site, locked it up, and handed the keys back to the city and to the Port Authority, and it's like, okay, our job is done.
I was at the World Trade Center site from that first week in September through the last column being taken out of the site. So it was about 9 months.
A huge lesson learned for me, and something that I will never forget, is that despite the number of super smart people in the design and construction community that I had access to that were volunteering their time, the group, or the sum of all their opinions, is far better than the opinion of a few people.
The original Trade Center was designed to resist an airplane impact, but airplanes have gotten so much bigger. The plane hit, but because of the redundancy in the system, it was able to redistribute the loads around the hole, and so the gravity wasn't the problem. The problem was the fire.
After 9/11, within a few weeks, started what ultimately proved out to be the most extensive investigation of any towers collapses or structural collapses ever. This is actually the physics-based modeling of that impact, looking from the top, You can see the penetration of the airplane, the severance of the columns in the front facade, but also in the middle of the core of the building. It's thin aluminum sheets that get shredded, but they're still flying at about 500 miles an hour. So essentially you have a power wash of metal impacting the structure that's keeping the building up. The steel columns that were not severed are getting their fireproofing stripped by that power wash of materials. That is the primary cause for ultimately the collapses. The structure of the tower had what is known as a three-dimensional outrigger truss at the top of the building. It was there to carry the TV antennas. The roof truss on that day, on 9/11, played a role for which it wasn't designed. As you can see from this graphic, it is connecting the columns in the core to some of the columns on the perimeter of the building. That steel grillage now will be able to act as a stabilizing and load redistribution mechanism. Since this building has excess strength, it remains standing thanks to the role of the roof truss. That roof truss saved lives on that day. It allowed the full evacuation of occupants below the impact zone. After 102 minutes, which is the time the North Tower lasted, it's no longer able to carry as much load. As steel gets heated, it softens. We recreated through physics-based computer modeling the collapse of WTC-1. And you can see it's largely symmetric, but the first thing you saw is the roof truss come down from the top. That is because the core columns had been attacked by fire at the impact zone, and they are less resilient than the perimeter tube. They start sinking in first, but after a while, even the perimeter tube is being dragged down, and you get what we call a pancaking event. After that, gravity is simply the strongest force you can ever imagine. 3,000 people were lost. The emotional toll of participating in the entire post 9/11 era was taxing on people. People who would come back from their rotation on the site clearly exhausted, with masks, full of dust, having seen things that are difficult to unsee.
I don't know that I really understood the health implications until much later.
You know, a lot of us got sick also. And years later, obviously a lot of firefighters, they were there, you know, every day. But for those of us that were there 4, 5, 10 times exposed to the dust, we started getting sick.
I mean, things have changed since the 9/11 attack. There's a much more organized way that we're able to evaluate buildings that do collapse.
So many people thought downtown was dead. It would never revive. But it was the developers, the real estate people, and the architects also. I don't know, there's something about human nature that when something breaks, they want to fix it. Okay? That you don't just accept this as a loss. The initial reaction was, no one's ever going to go in a tall building again. Okay? That was the initial reaction, which turned out not to be correct. Okay? We have more tall buildings now than we ever had. I think it's important to keep the memory of all these events alive because there's so much to learn from them.
I think the exact reason to tell this story now is because there were generations of people who have no idea that this occurred. They know about the firefighters, they know about the emergency responders, they know that the Red Cross was here, but that there was a group of structural engineers who stood up and put their health on the line in many cases and contributed to this collective effort to help New York City when the city needed us.
The way everybody came together was an amazing thing, and I don't think it is a rarity. I think that this is human nature, and we want to take care of each other. I have much more faith in mankind after this.